So there's one more thing to talk about with lists, and that is, what if we want to create a list where the items in it are not predetermined before the code is running? What if we want to create a list that gets stuff put into it as the code is going on, so it starts empty? So now I'm going to create a new file, call this list2 .py for Python file. Okay, so we have a list. It's going to start out empty. The way we declare that is like this. We'll just say list1 is equal to the empty brackets. So list1 is an empty list now. And let's suppose that I want to dynamically add a sequence of numbers in there. And let's suppose I want to add in the sequence of even numbers. And I want to put all the even numbers between, let's say, 1 and 20. So I'm going to make another variable here. I'm going to say max equals 20. And I'm going to use a loop to do this. I can use a while loop, or I can use a for loop. Because we're going up to 20 and we're stopping at 20, I'm going to use a for loop. Because that's a little bit easier to deal with than having a while loop and then putting in a break, everything else, or putting a counter in the while loop, because the for loop is always going to do it for us. Okay, so I'm going to say for, and I'll say index. That index is going to start at 0 and count up every time this loop runs. I'm going to say for index in, and I'm going to say range. We recall from the loop lesson. And I'm going to put max as the range. And a colon because it's a statement. And I want to put only even numbers inside of list1. So we need to get every other index and put it in there. So remember, index is starting on 0. So it's going to go 0. Next time the loop runs, it'll be 1. The next time it runs, it'll be 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to test to see if it's an even number. And there's a few ways to do that. There's actually a funny way I just thought of. One funny way you can implement this is you could say list1.append to put something on the end of the list. And you could append index times 2. This is not what I had in mind originally, but you could do index times 2, and then you could put an if statement here for break. You could say if index is greater than, say, max divided by 2 to make this a little more dynamic. Break. And realistically, we need to put this before we add anything into the list. Okay, this is a bit humorous example, but this is funny because we didn't want to put a break, because that's why we use a for loop instead of a while loop, but here we are. This is a little funny thing to do. You can say index times 2. Think about like 0 times 2, it's still 0. So that's going to append 0. So we're also going to check if, say and index is not 0. Because we want to get like 2 up to 20 in there. Okay, so what this is doing is it's asking, is index greater than max divided by 2? The reason why is because we're doing index times 2. So think about that. Think about how many even numbers are there between 0 and 20. Well, there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. There's 10. 10 numbers. And our maximum is 20 because we want to count up to 20 and put 20 as our last number in there. But our index variable here is going to be all 20 numbers, not just the 10 evens. And that's why we're going to multiply by 2, because you multiply a number by 2, it's always going to be even. Let me repeat that. if you ever multiply a number by 2, and assuming it's not 0, it's always going to be an even number. So if I have 1, multiply that by 2, it's 2. 2 times 2 is 4, another even number. 3 times 2, 6. 4 times 2, 8. 5 times 2, 10. Notice these are all even numbers I'm saying. And that's just a funny little thing about numbers. If you multiply by 2, it's always even. All right, so we have this list that's should be 2 through 20. And I think I'm going to splice this in at the end because this is a little more complicated than what I originally had intended, but keep that in mind. Resume. So we have our list, and we're going to print it out. Print list 1. Save that. Jump over to the code, or rather the terminal. Make that a bit bigger so it's easier to see. I'm going to say Python list 2. Print it out, and there it is. It's, oh, looks like 0 made it in there. So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 20. Okay, that's fine. This right here needs to be checked elsewhere. This right here, it's, yeah, so we'll say elif, and I'll put that. It's not equal to 0. Tap that up. Okay, so what happened here is checking to see if it's not equal to 0, and then breaking. We needed to actually check this, and if this is true, the index not equal to 0. If that's true, then we consider adding something in. If it's not 0, we don't want to. Yeah, because index being greater than max is the only thing that should cause us to stop, and this not being true should just tell us not to add it in there, but we don't want to stop the loop because we want to go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, etc. up to 20. And so put else here, just to do nothing. All right, now let's run that. Oops, I did not match the indentation. Yeah, notice how these are like spaced over one spacebar space. That's a problem. Got to make it all match because Python's very particular about that. There it is. Now we've trimmed off the 0 because this is saying only append a number if it's not, or if index is not 0. All right, so that's a little more complicated implementation for making a list of even numbers. This will be spliced at the end of the more basic one. Anyway, cut the video here. Okay, so we're going to look for even numbers, and we're only going to put the even numbers in our list. A way we can do that, not the only way, there's many ways to do this, is to say if index, and I'm going to use the modulus operator as a reminder. The modulus operator says divide the left number by the right number, and then ask the question, what is the remainder? And that's what it returns. So modulus is just like division. It's like saying divide, say divide by 2, but instead of giving the resulting fraction or the resulting whole number, it gives the remainder. Think about long division. If you're in middle school or in high school, think back to middle school, elementary school, or if you're in college, think back. And think about long division where we have that like shape like this, and a number here dividing the number inside, and then you put numbers on top, and that's the result. And sometimes you have to put R followed by the remainder. Regular division in Python, division of integers, will truncate off that remainder. It just cuts it off. It doesn't round it. And so if we want to know about remainders, we're going to use the modulus operator, which is the percent sign, just in case we forgot about that. So this is asking the question, what is the remainder if we divide index by 2? And we want to know, is that remainder going to be 0? And if it is, then we're going to say that number is even. Because if there's no remainder, you divide by 2, it's an even number by definition. Do list.append to add in number that is index. And we need to check for one more thing. We don't want to include 0 on this list. We'll start on 2 and count up. So to exclude 0, we're going to put an additional check in here. We're going to say, and index does not, we're going to say exclamation point equals, does not equal 0. So if the right side of this and check, where it says index does not equal 0, if that's true, which means the index is greater than 0, and if index modulus 2, rather the index divided by 2's remainder, that's equal to 0, and index is not 0, add that element to the list. And then this will print. And then we'll say list. Let's jump over here, copy this out. What happened to my shell? Oh, just lagged. We'll do Python list 2. And there it is. And this goes 2 through 18. Let's investigate why. This is an off by 1 error. There's the off by 1 error. So basically, check this out. We wanted to have 20 in the list. We've got 18. We started on 2. We got that part correct, but we didn't quite get in there. And that's because this for index in range right here, if we recall from loops, this is saying basically for this variable index, and this is not going to be code that's syntactically correct, it's just to get the point across, for this variable that we're now declaring, index, and we're assuming that it's equal to, we're saying it's equal to 0, index, and that it's an integer. So for integer index equal to 0, and this is how you would do it in C++, kind of. But you wouldn't be using a comma here, you'd use a semicolon in C++. For this integer that's set equal to 0, and while index is less than max, and then after this it's going to say take index and set it equal to itself plus 1. That's basically what this for loop is doing, but it's really condensed on line 6. But basically, we declare index, it's equal to 0, index is less than max, or while index is less than max, keep making loops happen, and then it says at the end of every loop, update index to be itself plus 1. So index is growing by 1 each time this loop runs. That's what's happening on line 6, in case that's a little confusing. Okay, so notice that it's less than max. Max is 20. Let me ask you this question, just for you to answer on your own. Is 20 less than 20? Is that a true statement? The answer is no. It's not a true statement. 20 is equal to 20. 20 is less than or equal to 20. And 20 can be greater than or equal to 20. These are all true statements because of the equals. Whenever this gets updated to 20 and it comes back up here and it checks, is index less than max? The answer is no, it's not. And so whenever index equals 20, the loop doesn't run, it stops the loop and it continues with the rest of the code. Because index, the maximum value it ever attained is 19, the last time this loop functioned, index is 19, mod 2 returns 1 and not 0. And so this part right here is false. This part here is still true for 19, but this is false. And as you recall, an and has to have true on both sides of it for the whole thing to be true. Since there's a false, it counts the whole thing as false. Therefore, this doesn't happen, and then that's the end of the loop. And so 20 never got added in. So you might ask, how do we fix that? Well, if you have an off by 1 error, you could just do this. You could just say plus 1. And that would fix the problem here. Well, that might not be the best practice when you start learning how to write, industry standard code. But for a beginner introduction level, you can just put +1 here. Just keep in mind, this is a habit that we may need to kick later because, well, I won't get into industry standard code, but you don't want to hard code just arbitrary values in programming typically. Anyway, let's go and run this, see if it fixed it. Oops, I forgot I wrote stuff here that was not meant to be syntactically correct. Let's just get rid of that. All right, now let's run it. We got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20 appears on the end, just like we wanted it to. And that is how you can create a list and populate it with entries while the program is running. And it doesn't have to be numbers. You can put other things in there too. Let's suppose you have a list that already exists and it has a bunch of names in it. So I'll say list2 is equal to Joe. All right. And let's say that we want to populate another list. I'm just going to reuse list1. So I'm going to remove this right here. I'm going to use the same structure though. Let's say we want to populate this list, but we want this to take only every other name. Let's say we want to take only the odd indexed names. So remember, this is index 0, this is index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4, index 5. So if we want to take only the odd ones, then we will still want to mod index by 2, but instead of checking for 0, which would mean it's even because there's no remainder, we want to say a remainder of 1. Because think about this, 2 divided by 1, the remainder is 1. 3 divided by 2, well, you're going to have a remainder of 1 again, because think about how many 2's are in 3. There's 1 2, and that leaves a 1 left over, so the remainder is 1. Now with 5, you have 2 sets of 2 and some hanging 1, and so that 1 is the remainder still. So all odd numbers, you mod them by 2, the remainder is 1. Okay, so here we are checking for odd indexes, and I'm just going to remove this index does not equal 0 because that was for even numbers. We're not really looking for numbers, we're looking at names. We want to add every other name, and we only want to add the odd indexes. So that should be Gail, Bobby, and Ashley. So we're going to say list 1 append. Then I'm going to index list 2. I'm going to retrieve a value in list 2. And when we index, we use the brackets. I'm going to retrieve using the index variable to index. That's why I called it index, if you were wondering. Okay, so let's suppose this loop is running, and let's suppose that index equals 1. So it's the second time the loop has run. This is true, and so we say, okay, list append whatever this becomes. And list to index right here, that's highlighted, this says, go into list number 2, this list up here on line 2, and retrieve the value that is indexed at whatever value is stored inside of the variable index. And so the variable index has a 1 stored in it. And so this gets replaced with a 1. And then it says, all right, start counting. We have the 0th index. We have the 1th indexed. Hey, this is the one we want. We want Gail. So take whatever is here and replace it with Gail. Run this. Oops. Set is not subscriptable. That's because I used the wrong thing. I used the braces. And I'm used to another language that I'm coding in right now. Please excuse that. In Python, we use these brackets for a list. Oh, list index out of range. That is because, all right. So I'm going to explain these two errors. Set object is not subscriptable. That's because I used curly braces instead of the square brackets, which was using a different type of collection. You can think of it as a list still, but it has its own different rules. We're operating on a list, which uses the brackets here. All right, that's that first error. The second error here, list index out of range, because this loop still has this max that's still set to 20. So I need to change this because this loop is running too many times. It's overrunning the end of this list and still trying to access things that are outside of it that don't actually exist. And that's why it says list index out of range. So to fix this, I need to change this max not equal to 20, but I'm going to say set max equal to the length of list number 2. And that's going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's going to return 6 for this. And that's our value of max now. I can just put max in here inside the range. And it's going to say for index in range 6. And if we recall, that's saying for the integer variable index, which is initialized to 0, while index is less than 6, run the loop, and each time the loop runs, add 1 to index. And so it should run a total of 6 times. And once the index value hits 6, it checks it, says, is 6 less than 6? It says no, because it's not true. And then it does not run the loop after that. All right, so now this should be able to run. There it is. We have this list of Gail, Bobby, and Ashley. And if we wanted the other ones, if we wanted Joe and Trevor, we would simply take this 1 on the index mod 2 and set that equal to 0, checking for the even entries. Now I can hit this. Let me clear this out. Maybe you can't see that as well. And there it is. We have Joe, Macy, and Trevor now, because that gave us the even ones, Joe, Macy, and Trevor. And that's how you can like dynamically access items in a list. That's how you can add things to a list at runtime. There's also more we can do with lists, but it's going to be a little beyond the scope of an introductory course. But we can actually take lists and put them inside of each other. So notice I have list 1 right here. Let me take over here and say list 2, no, list 1 dot append, and I need to make a new list for this actually. I'll come over here, I'm going to create list number 3, and we're going to say, make this list a little bit different. We'll say there's a name, we'll say Susie, and after that we're going to put, let's say we put an age. I'll put like, I don't know, 67 for the age. And now we're going to append not an element of list 3, but the whole of list 3. Now let's see what happens when we run that. Check this out. We have Joe, Macy, Trevor, just as before, but now notice how there's an open bracket and a closed bracket here. We have actually taken the entire list, the entirety of list number 3, and we have put it as the element of list number 1. So that's a list inside of a list. And you can index, like if we want to get that value of 67, this is how I would index to get that. You have to index twice, because you have to index for the first list, the outside list, and you have to index for the inside list. So let's say I want to print out 67 from that list. I'll say list 1, because that's the outside list, index, and I'm going to get the, let's see here, the 0th, the 1th, the 2nd, the 3rd indexed element. So I'll put a 3 here to get that one. And now to get 67, this is the 0th and the 1th element. So I have to index again 1. Now let's run this. And there's 67. 67 is not inside of a list because when we index something, we just grab that value out of the list and feed it up to wherever this indexing statement is. And so the print statement grabs it and prints it out to the console. All right, so that's a little more of lists that I felt like should have been in here. And that's all I have for now. And then After this, we're going to get onto some sorting of lists, where we can sort things by number, by alphabet, various different ways to sort. And that's going to be the next video. So I'll see you there.